Welcome to New Money. I'm Bryan Hurst. This evening, our program focuses on retirement and financial planning. South Africans wait patiently to hear Wednesday's budget and whether VAT and any other taxes will be increased. Our minister has to walk a tightrope as the tax collections and expenditure trends show tax collected lower and expenditure higher. Those not working and are currently getting a grant, will this continue? With all the possible tax implications to be dealt with, and for those lucky to have a job and even able to save, there are certain ways of avoiding tax before that. And joining me this evening is Polisa Duba, Wealth Manager at Centillion Wealth Advisory, and Jordan Toy, Director, Legacy Family Wealth. Polisa, Jordan, thank you very much for joining me. Polisa, I read an article that you wrote on Saturday. So I want to ask you about that, but I don't want to overlap on a lot of the questions that we've got. So you spoke about you spoke about, and let me just say what you said. You said navigating the resignation season. Can you want to deal with that, or will you deal with that later in the program?
Maybe just a little bit, and I know what you were doing on Saturday.
What I was doing was reading all my financial papers that I hadn't read last week.
What we find, and I'm sure Jordan would attest, at the beginning of the year, that's the time when the resignation letters are handed in. And so in the article, I just tried to explore what are the reasons behind it and what could we do, firstly, as employers, to try and avert that trend. And I think it starts with having, yes, the working environment needs to be great, but there are other things that you could be giving to your employees through employee benefits and so forth. But importantly, for the people that are leaving work, and I think this is what we're going to be touching on in the conversation later, what are your options? You know, how do you transfer your employee benefits, your retirement benefits, your other risk? We're going to be talking about insurance. So, let's carry that conversation from there.
Quite interesting. For many years, I ran a big pensions business, and we had about 200 funds, but we never ever evaluated. Were there more withdrawals January, February than any other time? Interesting. It'd be interesting for companies, people that manage pension funds and administer to understand whether that's correct. But Jordan, the big question that we always have is, why are so few South Africans able to retire comfortably? And they talk about statistics, you know, numbers. They talk about 6%. I don't know if it's 6 or 10. But it is a fact that people may reach retirement, want to retire. We talk about being in the golden years, but it doesn't always turn out to be the golden years.
No, 100%, Bryan, and I'll try to steer clear of too many numbers in my response. But I think all South Africans, we're aware of what the sort of state of play is in the country. You know, GDP growth, employment figures. I think all of those naturally have to form part of the conversation around how ready are you for retirement, because if we just look at the context of GDP growth, if the GDP growth's not there, the companies in the country, broadly speaking, are not necessarily growing revenue or earnings per share to the level that will ultimately feed into your retirement accounts or your RA or your pension, because ultimately those are the assets that our retirement accounts hold for the most part. And what that looks like in terms of positioning you for retirement over years and years of investing or taking part of your salary and putting it into that account. So we look at that from one aspect, but you know, more recently inflation is also something that in the shorter term affects your ability to plan for retirement. You know, especially the sort of lower income brackets, you know, where food inflation, things like that, are consuming a larger and larger portion of your monthly wage. And that naturally just filters through into how much you can save and invest, which is what positions you for a safe and secure retirement.
Well, I think you made two valid points, and I'll ask you to comment on that, Polisa. The first valid point you make, if companies aren't making profits, they can't pass on those profits to high salary increases. They may just stick to the lower level of inflation rates. But then there's also the job of a financial planner is to advise clients correctly and not always, you know, there's an expression which people have heard me on Sound Radio, a good general takes you where you want to be, a great general takes you where you ought to be. So we as financial planners should be taking our clients where they ought to be, not where they feel most comfortable. Because feeling most comfortable, the natural inclination of a client who's feeling comfortable is saying, I don't want to risk any money, and you've got a 30-year time horizon to retirement. So my first question is to you as a younger group, because I've been in the industry probably twice the number of years you guys have been alive, but you as the younger group, do you think the younger generation are taking it more seriously? And particularly we talk about those working, we're not talking about the unfortunate who don't work. and are doing the saving? And are you scared about phase, about being too growth orientated when the client is giving you indications, I don't want to take risk?
Yeah. Look, I think the low-hanging fruit is that we have to make the environment inclusive. And that's partly what the legislation is doing. But even the different stakeholders around the table, we need to be talking to each other. I mean, you asked me earlier around, my article and the employee benefits. Even there's a disjuncture. We're not talking to each other. Retirement fund operates on its own. We, as wealth managers and advisors, are operating on our own, and it's the client that's trying to navigate and make sense of all of this. So I think the low-hanging fruit is the industry itself talking to each other and making sure that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, so that retirement fund members ultimately can have better outcomes.
But you do an assessment. So the client now, a 42-year-old comes out, 42-year-old, and it turns out that all the questions they've answered is they're showing that they're conservative.
Yeah.
And you're going to plan for retirement. So we're going to talk about retirement annuities next, but you're going to plan for someone who's going to retire at 65, 23-year time horizon.
Yeah.
And the indications are, I'm conservative, but you can't be conservative with 23 years to go. You have to be growth orientated.
Yeah.
Now, are you concerned but that you're governed by regulations and phase and making sure that you deal with the client appropriately? Are you able to say to the client, look, I hear what you say, but that's not where you're going to be? Or are you scared if you do that, you won't get the business?
Well, ultimately, the law is to protect all of us, really, not just the client, even us as the professionals. But I think our role as advisors goes beyond the numbers. What's the reason why my client comes across as conservative, or they want their portfolio to be conservative? Firstly, maybe they haven't saved up enough for retirement. They're not sure about the economy, about our country and all of that. So all of these fears come into play in their decision as to how they manage and structure their finances. So as the professionals, we also need to wear a psychologist hat, right? Understand where the fear is coming from and guide the client through that. Yes, we know what they need. Their portfolio might need to be a little bit more aggressive, and they need the growth, they need the performance. But we need to guide them through the ups and downs of the economy and the markets, because that's when they start to do things that will take them backwards as far as the investments are concerned.
Well, we're listening to the financial plan of the year last year, so we're getting that. But Jordan, the point I'm making is, the statistics, the numbers may show conservative, but are you nervous at all about the way we regulate it?
I think regulation is obviously there for a very good reason, to protect investors. Pelesa has already touched on that. But just to unpack what Pelesa mentioned earlier, I think we're looking at, when we talk about risk tolerance and how comfortable clients are with taking risk, we're looking at it from one dimension, which is how they emotionally relate to risk, which is sort of more on a perspective of how willing are they to take risk. The other aspect to it, which I think we've talked about before, is the ability to take risk. And that's what the conversation is sort of focused on. We talk about how long do you have to invest. Factors like that sort of need to come into the risk equation as well, because you have a lot of future salaries ahead of you if you have a 20, 30, 40-year time horizon ahead of you and you're still working. So I think it's got to be twofold. We have to look at, are you going to be able to sleep at night with a higher risk portfolio, but also the ability to take risk.
I'm not necessarily saying higher risk, because if you talk about equities are always full in the high risk sector. Yeah. But you can get aggressive equities, you can get conservative equities. So, understanding. So when you say, are you prepared to take on more risk? It's, are you prepared to take on more growth? Put more growth in your portfolio, because you're going to need the growth, because what is the most important thing? Beating inflation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you also got to consider the opportunity cost. We're fixating on risk, and as you mentioned, growth is the flip side of that. But there's an opportunity cost in taking a defensive view. You may not have significant drawdowns, but what is the cost of 20 years of 2, 3, 4% returns that are left on the table by not taking on even a moderate level of additional risk? So that's also something that we have to factor in, and something.
Have you got any number on a 20-year? I mean, I'm just pulling a rabbit out of a hat, but have you got any number, guy investing and getting a 2 to 3% extra return over 20 years?
What about it?
Have you got any number in your mind? If I invest 10,000 Rand, 20,000, 50,000 Rand a year, what is the difference in value if I achieved over 22 years? We haven't got that number yet. I think what we'll do that in the next program. We'll actually do the calculations to show the client. So now, let's get onto the subject for 2024, being the end of the tax year. Let's unpack retirement annuities. Now, many people contribute to retirement annuities. They tell me, I've got a retirement annuity, I've got a pension fund. That's a room. I call that a room because it's a name. And you've got some institution you've invested your money. But it's how you funnel those monies into what funds. Let's just talk about, you a believer in retirement annuity, Palisa?
Absolutely. I think, it's one of those sweet deals that the government and SARS is trying to give us. You put your money into a retirement annuity or any kind of retirement fund, you get an income tax deduction. The money that's sitting in your retirement fund, you enjoy essentially a tax-free journey, right? Because you don't pay any capital gains tax in there, you don't pay any dividends tax, you don't pay any sort of tax until a point where you then start to withdraw from the retirement fund itself. So absolutely, I think there's a place for a retirement vehicle in your overall planning.
And if you do it before the 29th of February, bearing in mind, you won't be able to do it on the last day because the insurance companies need all the necessary documentation. But anything you can do up to 27.5% of taxable income up to a maximum of 350,000, you can get that tax deduction.
That's correct. So you've already mentioned the deduction itself of 27.5% limited to 350, but that's not to say that that's all you must contribute, because it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take one, earning a lot to breach that 350,000.
1.2 million.
1.2-ish or so.
Thereabouts.
So certainly if you contribute more than that, it comes back later to help you because you accumulate what we call disallowed contributions that you can use at a later stage when you retire or, and take a lump sum or take an income from your retirement fund. So you can enjoy a tax-free benefit at that point in time as well.
Let's put a pin in there. When we come back, we're also going to be talking tax-free savings and hopefully get through some of the other questions and emails. We're going to take a short break. I hope you stay with us. Stay tuned.